da sòcco, diciamo che fatto che dai.
Good afternoon. It's the same message as previously. We've again engaged the services of the sound engineer, Tim, and he has supplied the mics. To work well so that everyone in the room can hear, the mics must be used properly. The streaming is also very dependent upon the proper use of the microphones. Please, will members remember to raise a hand if you wish to speak so that Tim can sort the microphone, or a mic can be brought to you by Asher or Tom. Please speak directly into the microphones. They are designed for the speaker to be very close and do not work if the speaker is not close. The chair requests that you do not stand when speaking so that you can get as close to the microphones as possible. Tim will switch off the microphone when you have finished speaking. And one final one, please don't rustle your papers as the noise can be picked up by nearby microphones. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we start the proper part of the proceedings, I'm going to ask Councillor Martin Thacker and Councillor Nigel Barker to say a few words regarding Dorothy Ward, who was a long-standing member within this chamber. Thank you. Councillor Thacker.
Thank you, Chair. It is with sadness that we learned of the death of former councillor Dorothy Ward. She served on North East Derbyshire Council for a total of 31 years. Dorothy was first elected in 1976 until 1987, and then returned to the council from 1991 until 2011, representing North Wingfield Central. She was chair of the council from 1997 until 1998. Dorothy was a cabinet member with the remit of supporting the leader to build an excellent council. She was also the no-nonsense chair of the planning committee. Dorothy was a formidable character. She certainly wasn't a shrinking violet in council debate. My favourite comeback from Dorothy at a full council meeting when we were at Saltergate was, "What do Tories know about anything in your big posh houses?" She clearly hadn't been to Thacker Towers. Dorothy did stand for election one last time in 2011 in Pilsley and Moreton Ward, but wasn't elected. This was the ward of her close friend, Councillor Anne Holmes. When Anne was chair of the council from 2015 until 2016, Dorothy served as her consort. During their civic year, they fundraised for the Macmillan Cancer Centre. It was during those 12 months that I saw the kind and caring side of Dorothy. Her tough facade, used to effect as a member of the council, gave way to a person who was thoughtful and genuinely interested in how people were doing. On behalf of the Conservative group, I extend sincere sympathies to her family and friends. Dorothy served the people of North East Derbyshire well.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
Thank you. Well said, Martin. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity to say a few words about Dorothy, because quite a few people in here won't remember Dorothy. Like you say, it's been a while since she's been on the council. But similar to Anne Holmes, I think I made a similar speech when we were talking about Anne, that Dorothy was, she can be described as a model community councillor. She and a representative of that community. She was instrumental in establishing the community association in North Wingfield, and this body chased up the funding to build the original community centre, which we've gone, knocked down and rebuilt. But she did a great job with that, and she helped to provide many community facilities in that building, not least catering for up to 100 people on a Thursday afternoon, cooking dinners and stuff. She was also a stalwart of the Labour Party in Wingfield, and she was a member long before I was, which is a very long time ago, Gary. And she often told me that she would help deliver leaflets for her dad when she was 8 years old down around Waterloo. which I thought were very grand, until I realised it were a bit of Wingfield that were in Lower Pilsley. But never mind. That commitment to the Labour Party was recognised when she received an award for having been a member for over 50 years, which she really appreciated that. And I would like to put on record my personal thanks to Dorothy, and on behalf of the Labour group and the wider Labour movement, our thanks to her and our condolences also to her friends and family. And thank you, Martin, for your words. Thank you.
Thank you both. I've had time to consider the agenda for this afternoon, and I'm happy to propose the business and intend to take it in that order. The votes, as usual, will be by roll call, but they will be recorded votes on the budget. Just a reminder that we are being live streamed today by YouTube. So we'll move to the first item on the agenda, apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Pam Windley, Councillor Philip Wheelhouse, Councillor Oscar Gomez-Rini, Councillor Pat Ancliffe, and Councillor Betty Hill.
Are there any further apologies?
Yeah, sorry, Lee Stone. Councillor Stone. Oh, and Jackie Ridgway.
Councillor Hudson? Item 2, declarations of interest. I have a declaration of interest on this one for the Rickmill Homes part of the agenda. Councillor Hudson?
Chair, just to declare item 6, Ricknold Home section of the report, I declare an interest as a member of the Ricknold board.
Councillor Wilton? Councillor Clough? Councillor? Yes, this is not working very well.
Yeah, I declare an interest in item 6 being a tenant of the council.
Thank you. And I can see another hand, but I can't see who it is. Thank you. Councillor Armitage?
Yeah, item 6, a tenant of Ricknell.
Thank you. Moving on to item 3, minutes of the last meeting. We now have the minutes of the meeting held on Monday, the 28th of November. Are we happy that they are a correct record? Is there a mover? Thank you, Councillor Dale. The seconder? Councillor Cupid, thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. The motion was carried. Thank you. Item 4, Chair's announcements. This is probably the briefest in history. It's just to remind you of the service on Sunday, the memorial service for our late Queen. I'd like to thank those that have already responded, but you're all very welcome. And one fun night to look out for, which will be in March, which will be the fate race night that Councillor Liggett is organising on my behalf. So thank you. Item 5, leaders' announcements.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and keep my remarks fairly short as well. Just firstly, just to reiterate our key message on the cost of living, that the council stands ready to support all of our residents. Obviously, just contact us if you or anyone you know needs any help whatsoever. And we know that there are still people out there who are struggling, so we would ask that all members keep passing that message on in your local communities. Moving on just to the Levelling Up Fund bid, members will be aware that we submitted a bid for 17.8 million from the government under round 2 of the Levelling Up Fund with an ambitious master plan to elevate Eckington, as the bid was called. Unfortunately, we were unsuccessful in the bid, and naturally we are disappointed, but we do have to recognise that we face some pretty stiff competition of around £9 billion worth of bids for a £2 billion funding pot. We also recognise that we have done pretty well in terms of attracting government investment in the past 3 or so years, having secured over £30 million to improve town centres, make council housing warmer and greener, improve the energy efficiency of our leisure centres, and make lasting improvements to several of our communities under the UK SPF scheme. I think it's also important to highlight that the background work that we've done in terms of producing a master plan for Eckington will not go to waste. We will continue to lobby for funding and will be applying again, taking into account the feedback that we received on the original bid. And we are in an infinitely greater position than we were before, now that we do have a clear vision and a master plan for how Eckington could benefit from levelling up. So we will keep banging the drum and keep working to ensure that Eckington does benefit from that important funding. We're also committed to working with Eckington Parish Council to progress the plans for a destination park at Lansbury, which was part of the bid, and we've allocated 200,000 to make this ambition a reality, regardless of the outcome of any future LUF funding bids. On this same subject, I'm pleased to inform members that we are now open for round 2 of funding from the UK Shared Prosperity Quality Parks and Play Areas scheme. All parish councils are able to apply, and I'm delighted that we were able to award funding to several projects in round 1. The District Council is also committed to investing in several parks that we have responsibility for around the district as well. And on UK Shared Prosperity Fund, we're also open for applications for our Enhancing Village Halls and Community Buildings scheme, where operators can apply for up to £10,000 for refurbishments, particularly where the project includes energy saving measures. And so the deadline for these applications is the 10th of February. Clearly, we'll be discussing the budget and the challenges for our residents shortly, but one bit of good news is that we've decided to freeze our leisure centre membership fees. I think that demonstrates our commitment to supporting our leisure service, which is facing financial challenges due to rising energy prices, having invested heavily in improvements to our centres, but we're also supporting more residents to access the health and wellbeing benefits of membership by keeping our fees as low as possible at a time when people are under significant pressures. And finally, there's been some, what I feel is unfounded criticism of our hard-working street scene and environmental health officers recently. So I just wanted to give them a bit of a shout out and highlight some of the excellent work that they've been doing recently. We continue to have a high-profile prosecutions with a zero tolerance policy on littering and fly tipping. This includes a resident in Dronfield recently being fined £300 earlier this month for fly tipping in Eckington. We've invested in expanding our environmental health service, and it's reaping rewards. So last year we carried out the most patrols and handed out the most fixed penalties on record. And as a result, fly tipping reports are down 20% compared to 2019. So I just want to thank the environmental health service in particular, and the street scene service, for all of their hard work in recent years to try and really get tough on that issue. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. We move on to item 6, the medium-term financial plan 2022-23 to 2026-27. As in previous years, we will consider the financial and general fund first, and then the housing revenue account. I and other Rickneld Home board members will withdraw from the meeting at that point, but not before the council has appointed someone to chair the meeting for the remainder of that item. First things first, I would like the Director of Finance and Resources, Jane Dethick, to give us a presentation on the plan. I will allow questions to her on any technical points which need clarification at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me? Yep. Get a bit closer. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's been a difficult year this year to set the budget, as I'm sure you can all imagine. There's been an awful lot of challenges. It's because I've got my high heels on. That's better. Thank you. There's been an awful lot of challenges for us this year. So I just wanted to spend just a few minutes before the budget's gone through by the portfolio holder, just talking you through some of the experiences that we've had in setting it this year. I'll try not to move my head too much, because if I move my head too much, it makes a horrible sound. Next slide, please, Janet. Thank you. Okay, so I just want to spend a couple of seconds talking about the outlook. You'll all realise the economic and fiscal outlook has been unprecedented over the past few years, the past few months. Since March 2022, it's been particularly severe. We're experiencing high inflation and rising interest rates, and they've all led to higher than forecast pay settlements. For the council last year, it averaged 7%. We'd actually got 2%, which was the average prior to that in the budget. Significant increases to energy costs and increases to contractual spend, particularly around our CT contracts. So we're seeing anything in the region of 15–20% on those contracts. Next slide, please, Janet. Oh, she's already done it. She's so good. Okay, just spend a couple of minutes talking about the national settlement. So in terms of the national settlement, it's a further rollover this year. So 2019-20 was the last time that we had a spending review of any substance. So what's been happening since 2019-20 is we've just been rolling over the budgets, and this year is no exception. And my understanding is from the intel from the government is it will be the same for the next 2 years. So all the funding reforms have now been delayed until 2025, which is after the next general election. What that does is it gives us some certainty for the next 2 years, but it gives us a lot less certainty for the second 2 years of the plan. Next slide. Thanks, Janet. Included in the settlement is new homes bonus again. So I've included that into the budget for 23 and 24, 23-24 and 24-25. And the same applies to the services grant, which we've got for another 2 years. The lower tier services grant that we had last year has been replaced by a 3% funding guarantee. But in terms of the detail, when you get into the detail of those and you're sad like me and you calculate all the numbers, they pretty much amount to the same sort of thing. So that's in for the next 2 years as well. That totals just short of £1 million that we've included in the budget. On to business rates, pretty much business as usual with business rates. So we remain in the Derbyshire pool, and the current growth is based on our forecasts on that basis. There's no business rates reset until the 2025 reforms, so we've budgeted on that basis. Okay, this was an interesting one this year. So assumptions are normally pretty straightforward, but they've been incredibly challenging for us this year. Government grants we've included for the next 2 years because that's the assurance that we've been given, and business rates rate I've just talked about. Pay inflation's traditionally been around about the 2%. Last year was 7%. Next year we've posted 4% in the budgets. We've built 4% in on the basis that we're expecting average inflation to be around around 7% average. So 11% at the beginning of the year, 4% at the end of the year. We've got 2% in thereafter as we're expecting the markets over the medium term to turn to some sort of normality. We've built in some vacancy efficiencies into the budget as well, and energy costs. We're going to track data on these on a monthly basis. It's been incredibly difficult to forecast those. We have pared them down a little bit in later years, but compared to this year and next year, but incredibly difficult. And that one is going to need some resolution as the years progress. So in terms of 23-24, the shortfall is £977,000. That's before council tax. And that's proposed in the report that you will all be debating later. The budgets are cash limited, as they have been in the past. And just to give you an idea of the flavour of what we've been including in the budget this year, energy costs £1 million and pay inflation £1 million on what we had in the 22-23 base that you approved this time last year. Significant increases, largely, well, fully out of our control as well. So it's been quite difficult to plan for. Government grants received, as I said earlier, is £1 million. Moving on to the year after. This year looks a lot better, largely because of our assumptions, and we've pared down the pay inflation, we've pared down the energy costs, and we've cash limited everything else, and the government grants are still included. Next slide, please, Janet. And in terms of the longer term forecast, 25-26 and 26-27, the shortfalls begin to increase again. That's largely because I've removed the government grants from the budget in those years. We've got no assurances that they're going to be in there, so it's prudent for me to do so. Next slide, please, Janet. And that's the picture that you'll see that's in the MTFP that you're going to consider later. So you can see that that position's there before and after council tax, just as an indication for you. Next one, please, Janet. Just wanted to spend a couple of seconds talking about funding reforms. As I said previously, 2025 is when that's likely to happen now. There's a commitment to reforms, but there's absolutely no certainty around the details, so it's incredibly difficult to forecast medium term. The intimations are that worse off councils will get some form of short-term support, and that's known as damping. My view is it's prudent to plan for a smaller net budget at this stage, but there is that option that there may be damping payments later, and the next slide demonstrates that. Thanks, Janet. So there you can see that's the forecast that we've got, and indicative damping payments make a significant difference, but it is just we're bearing in mind all we're doing is moving the problem out. So all we're ever doing is moving the problem with the deficit out to future years, but nonetheless that does help us plan. The longer we have to plan, the easier it is to do it in a managed fashion. Next slide, please, Janet. And council tax, which you'll be considering today. So the government changed the referendum principles this year from 2% to 3%. As you'll have seen from my previous slides and the detail in the report, the external pressures are far in excess of that 3%. So whilst it helps, it doesn't solve the shortfall. And this is just me on my soapbox, which all of you know me, I mention this every time I speak to you. The annual increases to the base are really important. Keep growing the base, it makes it so much easier to manage. Moving on to the housing revenue account. So the assumptions are largely the same as the general fund. There's an increase in pressure on the housing sector, which I'm sure you've all read in the news around regulation. And Ricknord are experiencing all the same pressures that we're experiencing with regards to contracts, pay inflation and the like. We've gone through the negotiated process, which is part of the management agreement to agree the management fee, and that's been built into the MTFP that you'll have in front of you. In terms of rents, the social housing regulator directs the landlords regards rent increases, and the consultation, there was a consultation this year in response to rising inflation levels. So as you know, it's normally CPI plus 1%. At the time of setting in September, that would have meant a 12.1% increase. So there was a national consultation and the regulator capped the rents at 7% for 23-24 as a result. You'll all know that rents are the main source of income ever since self-financing in 2012. The rents are the main source of help the HRA stay at a break-even position, which it has to do. We have to budget for a break-even position each year. So in terms of breaking even for 23-24, a minimum rent increase of 4% was needed. I did quite a lot of modelling around this, and anything lower than 4% would mean that we would have to be taking money out of the reserves just to fund the in-year budget. That makes me nervous. It doesn't give you any long-term resilience. Sorry. So it also doesn't rely for much of a contingency or much resilience around the HRA, which of course, just like the general fund, is quite volatile at the moment. We've got no certainty around energy prices. We don't know what the pay award's going to be. And particularly for the building trade, the contracts are very high. So I felt it was prudent to recommend to Cabinet that some resilience should be built in, and a range of options were presented to Cabinet right through from 0 through to 7%, which was the cap, and 5% has been recommended on the basis of providing some financial resilience to the HRA. Next slide, please, Janet. Just to give me some comfort rather than anybody else, but I thought I'd share this slide as soon as I got the data. That's a benchmark of other local authorities and what they're actually charging in terms of their rents. So you can see where we're in that 5%. That's the recommendation in this report. Thanks, Janet. Just last slide, quick slide on capital investment programme. I think you'll all know these projects, they're the big ones that are going on. So in terms of the general fund, we've got Claycross Active, we've got the town centre work, and we've got a big vehicle replacement project in the plan. And in terms of the HRA, we've got capital works to the housing stock, further investment in EWI, and we've got the Whiteley's housing development. And I'm more than happy to go and sit down and take any other questions that you might have. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Councillor Shipman?
Thank you, Chair. On the, you talked about some options you put to Cabinet about the proposed increase in housing rents. Can you tell us what those options were and what they entailed in terms of, if it were, let's say, 0, what was the knock-on effect?
I haven't got all the details with me to hand, but what I can say is I produced a report. Oops, I produced a report to Cabinet that outlined what the costs were from that point. So it works on about 120. It's about £400, 400,000 per percent, to give you an idea. So every percent that you drop, you're looking at about 400,000 off the HRA.
Any other questions? No, thank you, Jane. Moving on to the next part of this, would now like the portfolio holder, councillor Jeremy Kenyon, to speak on the first part of the report, the general fund. The HRA recommendations will be dealt with later under a separate motion.
Get this right, is that coming through okay there? Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jane, for the presentation, and thank you for the various briefings you've held with groups and with the audit committee. I hope any technical matters have now been addressed, but if something comes up in the debate, we still might call upon you. We're going to talk about the council tax now and then do the rent later. First thing to say is that our council is in a strong position financially, in spite of the huge blows of COVID and the energy crisis and high inflation. And unlike some around the country, we have got a balanced budget for 23-24, and we're not having to make big cuts and are able to continue providing the excellent services for our residents. And this is partly the result of work going back over a decade by previous administrations, and more recently because this administration has also taken the necessary steps to maintain that financial strength. And behind that is all the excellent work done by our officers and everywhere in seeking out efficiencies, bringing in external funding, applying commercial approaches where appropriate, and especially to the financial team who over the years have ensured that councillors of all political persuasions are given the right information and guidance to maintain that financial strength. One particularly pleasing thing has been the decisions in the last 3 years to invest heavily in energy efficiency. Everything from reducing our office space footprint to now having some of the most energy efficient and greenest leisure centres in the country. So that unlike many other areas, we are keeping our swimming pools open and we're enhancing our fitness and leisure facilities with the huge benefits to residents' health, social lives, and even, for example, children's safety due to swimming lessons. However, inflation is obviously very high, as we've already heard, and with the council wage bill rising about 7%, lots of supplies over 10%, building works up 30%, and obviously energy 200% and above. We've got a difficult situation. So given that context, we're proposing a council tax rise of 2.99%, massively under inflation. So effectively it is a funding cut. For many years, this council's financial prudence means that we've not needed to use our reserves, having worked hard to find the efficiencies needed before that came about. But in line with government advice and in response to both the severity and the suddenness of the external pressures we face, this is finally the time that we need to use some of those reserves. And this will allow us to prevent sudden drastic cuts to services in 23-24 and plan for the future in a managed fashion. So the budget does include using £800,000 of reserves for the next financial year. Though there is, of course, work ongoing to try to reduce that dip. The MTFP does not include using reserves after that year, and the expectation is that inflation will ease and an ongoing programme of cost reduction will allow a balanced budget in the 24-25 year also. And after that, the MTFP, which we've got to remember, it's a long-range forecast and not really a budget. After that, it does show deficits, as Jane showed in the presentation, and the government funding is indeed an uncertainty, as it probably has been every year that I've sat through a finance debate in this council, which is not many years compared to, as we were hearing earlier. But those potential deficits are well within what could be addressed on that timescale if need be, and it would be wrong to jump the gun and cut millions from the budget today. So I now move the recommendations 1 to 7 dealing with the general fund.
Thank you, councillor Dow.
Thank you, Chair. I'll second and reserve the right to speak later if required. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I can now open the floor for other members to speak. You have a maximum of 5 minutes to get your points across. And I ask you at this stage to focus solely on the general fund issues. Councillor Barker.
Thank you. 5 minutes on that one. Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you to Jane and her team for the hard work. And I know we've had some briefings on this and the audit committee, so we are up to speed on all this. But I do find it a bit ironic, to be honest, that I don't know if you can remember back in 2019 when the party that's proposing this increase was saying that they were good at financial management and they would freeze the council tax and keep it down low. As it turns out, it's not just the Conservative government that's put taxes up to these record levels, and also not to mention the highest inflation in decades and the worst performing economy in the G7, and also the cost of living crisis that's hurting many of us in North East Derbyshire. Whilst it is true you froze the council tax for a year, during the 3 years since, during your term as leader, I think, Councillor Dale, the council tax has gone up more than it did during the 4 years when Labour in control. I'm sure you're putting this record straight in your election leaflets, and I'm sure you'll report that back to the electorate in spring. Moving on to the budget itself, I think it is a worry, as we've said in other meetings, Jane. Next year, you plan on using reserves. I think it's just been said 800,000 to balance the books, which, like everyone knows, you can only spend your savings once. And any policy that relies on this is on a road to nowhere. The other figures that stand out in the report are the sheer scale of the savings that have got to be made in future years. We are talking over 1.5 million by 26-27. That's on top of all the savings we've been making over the last 10 years. And it's fair to say that to achieve these sorts of savings, some hard choices will have to be made, and some skilled political and managerial leadership will have to be taken. That brings me on to my other point. While I have the utmost respect for Councillor Kenyon, the fact that you have not appointed a new portfolio holder for finance is deeply worrying, given the state of these predictions. Here's the rub of it. This year's government finance settlement, as we've just seen, has been aimed squarely at kicking things into the long grass, putting off the sheer scale of the financial problems facing local government until after the next general election, in the knowledge that a Labour government will have to pick up the pieces. Given the scale of this financial crisis, it will be irresponsible for any opposition party to sabotage the council budget just as an act of political point scoring. That's not how I or our group will act. But it's only right that your group own this large tax rise and that you take your stewardship of this council finances. And the decision you are taking today to the electorate of North East Derbyshire, it is therefore my intention to abstain, and I will encourage the group to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
I agree with pretty much everything Councillor Barker's just said there. I think the position that the council's in and what councillors are being put in today is an uncomfortable one. I do disagree with Councillor Barker in that I'm not going to abstain because I truly believe you either like something or you don't. And this, for me and our councillors, this is unpalatable. We're being asked to make decisions which, for years, Councillor Dale and the rest of the leadership team have been told that they know how to manage the council's finances. They know what they're doing. They can take different hard political decisions. But what hard political decisions have been taken in these last year or two? Everything just keeps getting kicked into the long grass. We haven't had a cabinet member for finance for a few months now. Councillor Kenyon's being dropped in on it. The director of finance is left holding the baby on the budget because I've not seen any political decisions which have directed this budget whatsoever. Ricknell haven't even been approached to come up with various options to save money instead of putting up that rent. I had a meeting with them this week and they have confirmed this, which is why I questioned you about the options put to cabinet. Speak to Ricknell directors. They're telling me one thing, you're telling me another. I think I can't vote for this. I really can't vote for this. There's various things within the budget itself, which I raised during the audit committee meetings. Planning appeals doesn't have any cash in it. We're going to keep dragging money out of the bottomless pit in the reserves every time we've got planning appeals coming in. There's no money in district council elections. As we've seen, we've had Conservative members resigning and going off the council in their droves in the last 4 years. So how can we have zero in, assuming we're going to have no by-elections in between? the Charlie Park Cafe numbers on the budget reckons we're gonna end up with £250,000 income. There's no cafe in any leisure centre that's gonna make £250,000 income. And yet we think we are because it's Charlie Park and it's a brand new building. It's insane. And the Kilmarsh Leisure Centre cost, we were told in this chamber that would be breaking even. It would not be costing this council hundreds of thousands of pounds. What are we at a year or two later? It's costing the council hundreds of thousands of pounds, and that figure just keeps going up if you look at the projections. That is not what councillors in this chamber were told at the time when that proposal was going through. And like I say, I wish I could vote for it, and you know we have to take these hard decisions, but I cannot bring myself to vote for increasing rents for the most vulnerable in North East Derbyshire and banging the tax up to the maximum according to the projections the Director of Finance has just put up to the maximum for the next however many years, 5 years. How can we be forced to do that? And I actually think that members should have been engaged a lot sooner than we were than January of this year, because we might have been able to actually help and come up with a consensus on what sort of decisions we take going forward. Unfortunately, that's not happened. And unfortunately, I'll be voting against this budget today.
Thank you. Just a reminder that this is just a section on the general fund and nothing else at this point. Is there anyone else, anything to say? Councillor Fennell?
Hear that? Yeah. Oh, well, first of all, I'd like to thank Jane and her team who've obviously been working really hard to make the numbers come together in a difficult budget period. Pressures from labour, material costs and the energy demand, which couldn't be predicted, have made it even more complicated. And we all know that the council is facing lots of challenges in the future. But the issue I have with the budget, that for me, there doesn't see any proposals on how we're going to try and improve efficiency or how we're going to reduce costs. At some stage, those decisions have got to be made if we're going to balance the books. Second item for myself, pretty important, is business growth. There's no real forecast that business growth and revenue increases will be delivered for business. It's a fairly static budget going forward over the next few years. It's also heavily reliant on damping payments, which are fictitious numbers. We're not sure what's going to happen there. They may be higher, they may be lower, but they're included in the budget in future years. There's nothing, as I can see, and I'm waffling a bit now, on the effects of Northwood. That's a contract, that's a project, it's being looked at, it's being reviewed. I don't know whether that's a positive or a negative for the council. Another area that concerns me is the amount, thousands of pounds that potentially being spent on frivolous planning appeals. Not sure where that fits in the budget, and I'm not sure what the numbers are, but it seems to be a lot of money being spent on something that we're being advised not to do. The other area that probably came to light this morning is the leisure centres, and I think the leaders mentioned this. I think they're a good thing for the district. They're promoting healthy and well-being, but they are coming at a cost. And I think the projections in the budget are fairly optimistic, and a general review of the leisure centres will need to take place to see what they really are costing, the investment and the returns, particularly when the Queen's Park Sports Centre is looking to close its gaff. So if they can't generate profit, it'll be interesting to see how the other leisure centres in our district could do better. Which leads me down to the two areas. I only concentrate on the two. The council rate at 2.99%. We need to do that. It's below what the recommendation is, but we've somehow got to balance the books if we can. But the bigger thing for me is the Drawing Down Resilience Fund. Something like £750,000 is being put into the pot to balance the books. I've never set a budget with £1 million backup to balance it. That's not sustainable going forward. But there's no proposals in this document to say how we can impact on that going forward. Realise you need to do it this year, but it's not sustainable going forward. And for that reason, I won't be voting for the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dale, do you wish to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's quite a lot of politics in that, so I'm going to try and answer. There's lots of different points. I'll try and answer as best as I can, but it might seem a little bit sporadic, I suppose. I suppose the first thing I'd say is that setting council tax is always a difficult and delicate balance to strike. We've got to manage the impact on our residents, as well as the very significant pressures that we're facing as a council, and those services that our residents rely upon. And I think we've got to have that very firmly in mind when we reach a decision. And for me, the point I'd come back to at every stage is that 2.99% is well below inflation. In essence, this is a real terms cut to the budget. So it's not a debate about how much we're increasing council tax. This is about a debate about how much of a cut to our budget we're absorbing in order to mitigate the impact on our residents. And that's the absolute reality. I think it's also worth highlighting the actual value of our proportion of council tax and what the increase actually means. We're looking at about, given the fact that our proportion of council tax is only a very thin sliver, it's less than a quarter of the total council tax bill. So for a Band D property, we're looking at an increase of about £6 per year. It's a very, very low increase in the grand scheme of things. Always worth reminding ourselves of that. Virtually no other council in the country are going to be arguing for less of an increase than 3%. Just on the points on the resilience reserve, I think it's really important to just set out that is a specific reserve for resilience. It's set up for exactly this purpose. It's rainy day money, and it's worth highlighting it's a completely different reserve to the investor save reserve and the general reserve. So it's an extra reserve, and actually, I think it's a good thing that as a council we've set that reserve up and put £2 million into it for these exact scenarios. We always knew COVID was going to be difficult, and it's quite likely. We always knew that there would be difficulties after COVID. So that reserve is there for exactly that purpose, and to mitigate the impact. As Councillor Kenyon said, it would be absolutely foolish of us to start slashing services left, right, and centre when we know that inflation is going to come down. It's far better to use that reserve that we've purposely built up for this purpose to have a smoother landing to a more efficient and better run council longer term. I think we have to remember that this affects the base. Failure to set an appropriate level of council tax now will affect us for every single year thereafter. There's been a few points around who the portfolio holder for budget is. I thought it was pretty clear. It's Councillor Kenyon. He's sat there introducing the paper and introducing the motions. He's done a huge amount of work, and I'm very grateful for Councillor Kenyon to do that. But the reality is that setting the budget is not the responsibility of Cabinet, it's the responsibility of every single councillor in this room. And I think we all have to be really clear about what it means to abstain on a vote like this. For me, it is an absolute abdication of responsibility. And we heard Councillor Barker talking about picking up the pieces after a Conservative administration. I just remind him what happened when Labour left office in 2010 and the note that was left that said that there was no money left. Just on regional directors, Councillor Shipman raised the point around them. Just like to reassure him that they were there at the informal cabinet meeting where this issue was discussed, and I remember myself even asking for their opinion on it. So I don't know what you've been told or whether it's been slightly warped in your own imagination or what, but certainly they were there and they were part of that discussion, and I very much took on board their feedback. There's been discussion around the sports centres and what they're costing us. We as an administration back our sports centres to the hilt. We're investing massively in them. We recognise they're a massive good for our communities. They positively impact hugely in terms of the health and well-being of our residents. They are clearly going to be impacted by inflation more so than most other parts of the council, because they are very buildings based, and they're buildings that do use up a lot of energy. So we have to accept that there's going to be a bit of a hit this year. But from my perspective, we absolutely back them. And actually the cafe infrastructure that we have, that's a key part of our campaign to get them to wash their own face and to reduce costs. They are a commercial asset to those buildings. And I know in Dronfield, it's a key part of the strategy that means that Dronfield turns a small surplus rather than deficit. On planning appeals, I believe personally that where a planning committee makes a decision to oppose an application, we need to back that. So all of this talk about wiping off, just drawing a line under planning appeals, I think it's quite disappointing, really. It's not really what residents expect from a democratic council, that we're going to run away as soon as the costs get a little bit scary. I think when residents make a case and a planning committee refuses an application, we should back that up. It's absolutely really vital for public trust in local councils that we do that. Just on council tax, I think we have kept it low. I averaged that it's less than 2% a year for the past 4 years. You know, we've faced a difficult challenge with COVID, with inflation, with other issues, and I think we have kept it broadly low, or certainly as low as we possibly can, whilst delivering really good service. And we've also championed transformation savings throughout the past 4 years. We've done a heck of a lot of savings, and we'll continue to do that. The budget position in 3 or 4 years' time doesn't particularly daunt me. I know as an organisation we are fantastic at being resilient and adapting to the challenges that come before us, and we have an excellent senior management team to deliver that, and a very strong administration that can deliver that as well. So I'm happy to second, as I say, and absolutely refute most of the points that have been made by the opposition, and disappointed it's been turned so political, Chair.
Thank you. I've got 2 hands up. Councillor Hancock, then Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, to pick up on several of the points, a lot of them I'm actually going to harp on because for years I've said exactly the same as Councillor Fennell. We can't keep sitting there saying that there's unidentified savings coming up. We actually need to have some meat on the bones. And I said this under both administrations. So the previous one, to be fair to them, actually weren't as bad at saying the number of ones, but I'm a bit older than Councillor Dale, and I remember the Labour government at the end of the 70s, which left this country in a real mess as well. So I don't think they can crow on in terms of that. I will pick up on what Councillor Dale said. There obviously is a clear disparity, and I know we're not on the HRA yet, but the directors of Ricknell actually said to us that they hadn't even been asked to present alternatives. So there's clearly a discussion that needs to be had between them and the cabinet somewhere. Obviously, we're playing with words over the resilient reserve because ultimately we are throwing reserves into this to make it a balanced budget. And it's very dubious when we're starting to call it a balanced budget when we're having to use reserves to actually make it balanced. So that is a concern. It's not sustainable. In terms of the planning, yes, we should. Where we have got a robust case to defend a planning decision, we should do so. I think that the key point that certainly from our perspective is that we need to be putting money back in there. It isn't a bottomless pit, and as we have more and more cases which we're going to defend, then that reserve is going to go down as well. So somewhere along the line, it needs topping back up again. So that there has to be some sort of budgetary aspect there. Some of these figures which people have said, they are concerning. Yes, whenever you're proposing a budget, it's difficult, but we have got some figures which quite clearly are meant to make it look a better position than it is. And obviously we're all well aware of what's happened in Chesterfield. Being Smart Leisure Centre earlier on, and if they can't make it balanced, we've got no chance in areas that are typically less affluent. I know Dronfield is kind of the exception when you compare it with Killamarsh, Eckington and Clay Cross. So I think there are concerns there. 299, yes, it is a low, it's certainly below inflation. But obviously, all of our residents are being impacted by the inflationary increases, and an additional 299 is hurting them, no matter how insignificant it may seem in the grand scheme of things. We're voting against the budget because it simply doesn't make sense. There are anomalies in it which we can't reconcile, and on that basis, we can't approve this budget. So that's where we sit on that one. Thank you.
Councillor Barry.
You might be pleased to know this isn't about your figures and your budget.
Oh, well done.
I just want to say, I am absolutely appalled by some of the language that you use from the Tory party. Why would you say that somebody's got a warped mind? You're always coming up and deriding people. You can't speak to us without trying to pull us down. And it's about time it stops. You're not the first, and you can laugh as much as you want, Councillor Dale. You're really beginning to get on my nerves with this, along with your members over there that did the same last year. where a complaint went in about your behaviours. You're not improving. And I'm getting a little bit fed up of it now. So if we can't be civil to one another, keep your mouth closed. Thank you.
Are there any other comments, concerns? Councillor Kenyon, you have a right to reply.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of the points have already been responded to by Councillor Dale. In particular, just to re-emphasise, a 2.99% rise is around a 5% cut. That's a massive thing to deliver for the council already. In terms of cost cutting, I mean, there are too many things to list, to be honest. Energy use is one. All the work done on our leisure centres is part of it. What we're doing with combining offices, it's all about cost reductions, better use of technology that's going on in all the various services, again, to reduce running costs, team restructuring where appropriate. That's another area where there's a lot of work being done to reduce costs, and undoubtedly there's work on procurement as well, trying to, in a very difficult environment, make sure that we do get the best price for the things that we buy. So, you know, there's an endless list of things being done. There's no particular big thing though, but coming to leisure, I suppose you could say, close all the leisure centres. Yeah, that would save a load of money for sure. However, first of all, I would put our leisure team up against any in the country, any council leisure team. They are very good at running a service and they can make cafes work. They do make them work, and they actually help to cross-subsidise the rest of the service. And it might be an option for a different administration to consider. This one will not consider that because the use of our leisure centres is rising. Their importance is rising. They are absolutely a key community asset, and we will continue to support them, and we will ensure, as we've done with Killamarsh, that where a facility is in grave danger of running into the ground and being closed because of years of mismanagement, we will step in and make sure that facility survives and thrives for the sake of the residents, which is exactly what we've done. And we've done it even in spite of the COVID and the energy crisis pressures. In terms of the reserves, it's a 1-year hit. Starting a war in Europe and throwing energy prices through the roof. That's one of the few times when using reserves does make sense. Just on damping payments, Councillor Fennell, yes, you're right, in the sense that, and as Jane would back up, we cannot depend on those. However, I think it probably, if you look back through budget papers for a very long time, it's a very similar story. There's always the unknown in the future. And while you don't necessarily take action immediately about the biggest unknowns, you do look at them, understand them, and be ready for them if that should happen. And it would be very imprudent not to. However, it would be equally imprudent to cut things now on the basis of what may be in 3 years' time. So I think every administration, when they put in that position, comes to the same conclusion. And because we have 2 years of certainty, that's plenty of landing room if the government did announce a 5-year plan to reduce funding in some drastic way, I guess. Difficult choices, and not really party political choices, just facts of how local government is funded and has been funded for a long time. So, if there's any other things to comment on, I think I'll leave it at that. Sorry, just to say yes on business growth. I do take the point. This morning at 8 in the morning, I was in Dronfield at a startup event hosted by North East Derbyshire District Council, where we were specifically trying to encourage new businesses into the area, new business startups. It's not a direct remit of the council alone. It's shared with a lot of other organisations, and I can assure you that in North East Derbyshire, we are well perceived by those organisations like the British Business Bank and so on. But yeah, there's an awful lot of work to do to build up business in North East Derbyshire and in the East Midlands. And I could hear Councillor Lewis in his head what he'll be saying now about investment from the government, but I'll leave that one for another day. So I'll move the recommendations 1 to 7. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll now move to the vote. We've had the motion before us. It's been moved and seconded, and the monitoring officer will now conduct the vote, which will be a recorded vote.
Thank you. I'll read your names out in reverse order as usual. Can you please tell me if you're voting for, against, or abstaining? Councillor P. Wright. Councillor B. Wright. Councillor Welton. Councillor Thacker. Councillor Tate. Councillor Strafford Stevenson. Councillor Shipman.
Against.
Councillor Ruff. Councillor Rouse. Councillor Rowe. Councillor Rennick. Councillor Reader.
Abstain.
Councillor Powell. Councillor Potts. Councillor Platts. Councillor Pickering. Councillor Morley. Councillor Lilly.
Abstain.
Councillor Liggett. Councillor Lewis. Councillor Lacey. Councillor Kerry. Councillor Kenyon. Councillor Jones. Councillor Hutchinson. Councillor Hartshorn. Councillor Hancock. Councillor Hall. Councillor Gillett. Councillor Fennell. Councillor M. Foster. Councillor A. Foster. Councillor Emmons. Councillor Elliott. Councillor Drabble. Councillor Dayton. Councillor Dale.
4.
Councillor Cupid. Councillor Cornwall. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Clough. Councillor Birkin. Councillor Barker, sorry, Councillor Barry. Councillor Barker.
Abstain.
Councillor Armitage.
4.
Right, building power. The results are as follows. The result was 26 for, 5 against and 14 abstentions. The motion has been carried. This leads us on to the housing revenue account. I and the other RHL board members are declared pecuniary interests, so in this we intend to leave the meeting during the discussion and the vote. However, before we can do that, I have a motion for a temporary chair for the remainder of this item. I'd like to recommend Councillor Barry to replace me for this. Oh, Councillor Barry Lewis, sorry, I'm looking at him half asleep here. I need to go home. Can I?
I'll second Councillor.
Yeah.
Thank you, just got the right name. Are those in favour? Wonderful. No, we need to. Those against? Abstentions? Oh. Councillor Barry Lewis, here you go.
Wait for the councillor to leave the room. In the meantime, I'll thank you for your overwhelming support of my temporary chair of this part of the meeting. So today we're dealing with the HRA part of the agenda, which is items 9, which is sections 9 to 15 and the recommendations of your report. So I'm guessing that we just throw it open. Am I correct? For Councillor Kenyon to speak first.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So moving on to council rents, the government have set a 7% limit. That's already, 3% or so below inflation. However, we are proposing only a 5% increase. Our Section 151 officer has informed us that the HRA is required to budget so that it breaks even each year, and going below 5% will present a serious risk to that due to the huge number of unknowns. In the last few years, we have invested the rental income and millions of pounds of government grants in energy efficiency work. Our tenants are now benefiting from that work in every energy bill, both reducing fuel poverty and ensuring there is more money spent in our local economy. So please bear in mind that every 1% we do not increase rent by translates into losing £1.6 million of investment over an administration. It's always a balance between the short and long term. So the 5% rise reflects the belief that it will be a huge disservice to council house tenants to reduce our investment in the fabric of our council houses, and that would lead them to incur much greater costs in higher energy bills. It would also reduce the total number of council houses, for example, by reducing our ability to invest in projects such as Whiteley's. And just as with the council tax, it should be noted that rent rises are limited by a percentage each year. So any rise not taken is then a cut for every year going forwards. So the problem accumulates over time. Our council house rents are well under the target of 80% of private sector rents. Indeed, in some areas, they're more like 30% below the market rent. And alongside, so both the council and Rignald are also facing increasing demands on our services. And the social housing regulator, for example, is putting in additional requirements in relation to damp and mould handling. And as a landlord, we can take comfort that we're better placed than many others as a result of the work and the proactive work that Rignald have done and continue to do to ensure our tenants' homes are safe. But these extra measures do inevitably add some additional cost. And of course, Rignald are experiencing similar cost pressures as a result of high inflation. And I'm not quite sure where the idea that they've not worked on any efficiencies comes from, because we've been very clearly told that they have made a lot of done a lot of work to ensure that the rise in the management fee is only £800,000 instead of £1.5 million. And it should also be remembered that's the first rise in many years. The management fee has been frozen for a long time. So they've been working on efficiencies a long time and they continue to do so. It's also just important to note the fees paid from the HRA, which is funded from council house rents, and this does not affect the council tax. What else? One more thing. Well, as I've already said, really, and it's been said before, that the rents are used to operate our council houses and to invest in upgrading them. And we hear continual complaints about the quality of rental stock around the country. And we can't afford to let that stock deteriorate for the sake of our tenants and residents. And in particular, a large amount of the capital programme is used to increase levels of insulation, as I mentioned earlier, and the other improvements that our tenants rightly expect to have houses that meet the lettable standards and are fit for purpose. So over the life of this plan, £81 million is forecast to be spent on our housing stock. Obviously, some of that is for new kitchens in houses that have been 25 years without, because of whatever. It'll be whatever comes down the pipe, really. But it's all about investing for the future. So put simply, the choice is between suitable, affordable council housing or taking a very short-term view that will hinder residents for, well, decades to come. So I'll move the rest of the recommendations in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, councillor Kenyon. Councillor Dale,
To second and reserve the right to reply, Chair. Thank you.
thank you very much. We have councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Am I on? Ooh, lovely. I think it's fair to say this is a very difficult one, isn't it, for me?
Chair.
Can you? They've left. Wait, you can leave if you want, Jeremy. I don't mind.
They have left the building.
Sorry, I've been so focused on my paper here, not looking at what's going on behind me. Thank you.
Yeah, you can carry on. Thank you. Yeah, it is a difficult one, this, because as you can imagine, personally, it's very difficult, and for our group, because I fully understand the argument that's been put forward. We want to spend money on tackling the non-traditional housing and all the work that needs doing. I understand there's extra pressures now with the damp situation that we've got by the government saying we've got to do something about that. We also understand that there's a shortage of council houses, that we could do more and build more council houses. But, this is the but, we all understand the 5% increase on the rents at this point, when all the other council tax bills are going to go up, not just North East, but everywhere else. It might be the straw that breaks the camel's back, really, and we don't think that can be sustainable, really. So, like I've said, it's a very, very difficult decision. We need to balance the books. We need to tackle the issues of the housing sector. We've got all that. But we feel at this time, we don't think we can support this rent increase. So, as you've said it, Alex, it's probably, we have to make a decision. And the decision is, we're not going to support the rent increase.
Okay, thank you, councillor Barker. Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of important points in terms of this. No, and just to actually correct Councillor Kenyon, no one said that Rickneld hadn't made efficiencies. They hadn't been asked to look at alternative costings to get the budget through. That's a slightly different thing to what was said. I think one important factor to actually keep their services exactly as they are and to do the investment that they are doing only needs a 4% increase. And I think that is one key thing. The 5% is being suggested as a buffer, an additional contingency. It isn't actually needed to balance that budget. And I think that, and yeah, it might only be 1%, but that 1%, given that a lot of our council house tenants are some of our most vulnerable people in the whole district, that 1% to us makes a huge difference, and I think it will to a lot of them. I think whilst we've picked up on new things which are actually being forced on Rickneld, like the damp and mold situation, we also need to acknowledge how much they pick up of stuff that actually isn't theirs. And because of government cuts in social care and to the police, they're actually dealing with a heck of a lot more antisocial behaviour issues than they should be. And they're also becoming the first point of contact when people are needing social care and support and benefits advice. And there's a lot of money and time that is being invested from Rickneld in services that actually they shouldn't even be delivering, but it's testament to them that they are picking up that slack, and also that is coming out of the HRA, obviously, to pay for those roles as well. So again, we can't support it to 5% one. Yes, 4% might only seem nominal, but it is doable. It is doable for the council without it having an impact on services. And obviously that extra little bit of money in people's pockets would make a big difference during a cost of living crisis.
Thank you, councillor Hancock. Councillor Dame.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. I think it's just worth reiterating the slide that Jane put up, which demonstrates we are one of the lowest already out of about 35, I think, that were sort of given a straw poll at a recent meeting that we attended, who were going as low as 5%. I think to Councillor Hancock's point, you know, it is a fair point that 4% is survivable, but the first rule about setting a budget is always to allow for contingency. We don't know what's going to happen over the course of a year. So I think an additional 1%, clearly, obviously, it will always have an impact on residents, and absolutely accept that, you know, this again is a difficult balance between balancing the needs of the council and the needs of our housing stock with the needs of our residents who are facing difficult financial challenges. But I think that having that contingency is really important, and certainly in discussions that we've had with the Section 151 officer as well, you know, it would be very, very tight without setting that additional contingency, and could make life very difficult for us, and could force us to make cuts to some services that we wouldn't want to deal with. I think on the antisocial behaviour issues, I would disagree somewhat and say that Ricknell should always have a role in community safety and dealing with antisocial behaviour. They're a major housing provider. It's part of what they get the management fee for, and I think they do a very, very good job of it. They've got a lot to give and a lot to contribute to that discussion and that work around ensuring that people feel safe in their community. So I would disagree and say that they, you know, that's an important part of the role. Absolutely accept that, you know, a lot of people are struggling at the moment, but I think the other thing that we do have to remember is that quite a large proportion of council housing tenants do get some support under a means tested welfare system. And I think that the thing that really sticks in my mind is that there will be some people in council housing who don't qualify for means tested benefits, so they do pay their rent in full, and there'll be very comparable people to them in the private rented sector who are already paying a heck of a lot more in rents anyway, and will be faced with much higher increases in their bills. And I think if I was in that situation, I'd be pretty upset and annoyed if the council were reducing the rent rises on those in council housing, because effectively that will feel like the council is subsidising the bills of those people. And I think we do have to pick that broader, balanced viewpoint and that context into fair figure. And really importantly, it enables us to continue to invest in council housing so that a better housing for our residents, a greener, warmer homes for our residents, and also that they help to reduce the energy bills of our residents as well. So I think 5% is the right figure. It's a difficult decision, as everyone else has highlighted. Construction inflation at the minute is 20 to 30%. And, you know, we want to keep doing that investment. So I think from my perspective, that additional 1% to get us to 5% is the right decision for this council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll use my position of the chair to make one point, reinforce what Councillor Dale has said around private sector rents, and not forgetting, of course, there's an awful lot of mortgage payers out there who over the course of the last year or so have seen some pretty significant rises as well to their mortgage payments. And Councillor Dale makes a very good point as well around the initiatives around green investment into our council housing. That is incredibly important to keep down people's bills, and it's something that we clearly cannot stop doing. So I think it's a wrong decision to not vote for this rise in the way that is set out in the report. Councillor Kenyon, do you want to make any summing up points? Yes. Sorry, I didn't see you there, Councillor Shipman.
I feel like I'm in Twilight Zone. We've got Conservative councillors trying to persuade us about we need to vote for this increase, when it was the government, the party that you're part of, is the reason that mortgage payments are through the roof and inflation's off the scale. Mortgage percentages has gone up from 3 to 6% because of the former Prime Minister's mistakes in government when she hashed her economic reforms. And now you're trying to persuade us that we need to vote for these increases because those that have got higher rents now off the back of that are somehow going to be annoyed at the other people in North East Derbyshire who have got a reduced rate cost of in council housing. I mean, that literally is the most laughable thing any of you two have both said, to be quite honest, and that takes some doing. There's no way we can vote for this. I think it might be a compromise if we could take it to 4. You know, at least it's something. But just to try and convince us, because your own party's failed in government, cut local government's funding. The current member of Parliament for North East Derbyshire voted for a 15% cut only a few years ago. And now you're telling us that we all need to back you on your crusade to increase rents and taxes because of those mistakes. It's absolutely incredible, to be quite honest.
Thank you for those pointed political interjections there, but I thought it was the Bank of England that set interest rates. Councillor Kenyon.
Wow.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, what to say really? It's obvious that the Conservatives are to blame for everything, including a war in Europe. So I have to say, I don't accept that. I think what we're looking at now at 5% is cut to the bone. I mean, 4%, it's a round number, to be honest. It could be 4.2%, 4.3%, whatever happens. It won't be an exact number. What will end up happening is £400,000 a year, £1.6 million per administration will not be available to invest in housing stock. There's not enough in the other parts of it, the community services, to actually cover that, probably, even if you completely strip them to zero. And so the end result will inevitably be worse houses for residents. And I talk to residents all the time about their council houses and the insulation, from my interest in the climate change, actually, rather than the finance. It makes a huge difference to them. And we will just be hurting residents if we cut investment in those programmes. And so that's why we're at 5%, and anything else will be, I would assume, seen pretty badly by those residents who are in a house that doesn't get improved because there isn't the money to do it. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think that was everybody. Unfortunately, we have to go to the vote now. I believe this is a recorded vote again. Okay.
Yes, yes, Chair, by law, a recorded vote. So as before, I'll read names in reverse order. Please, can you tell me if you're voting for, against, or are abstaining? Councillor P. Wright. Councillor B. Wright. Councillor Welton. Oh. Councillor Tate. Councillor Strafford Stevenson. Councillor Shipman.
Against.
Councillor Rouse. Councillor Rowe. Councillor Rennick. Councillor Reader.
Against.
Councillor Powell. Councillor Potts. Councillor Platts. Councillor Pickering. Councillor Morley. Councillor Lilly.
Against.
Councillor Liggett. Councillor Lewis. Councillor Lacey. Councillor Kerry.
Against.
Councillor Kenyon. Councillor Jones. Councillor Hutchinson. Councillor Hartshorn. Councillor Hancock.
Against.
Councillor Hall. Councillor Gillett. Councillor Fennell. Councillor M. Foster. Councillor A. Foster. Councillor Emmons. Councillor Elliott. Councillor Drabble. Councillor Dayton. Councillor Dale.
Four.
Councillor Cupid. Councillor Cornwall. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Clough. Oh, sorry. Councillor Birkin. Councillor Barry. Councillor Barker.
Again.
Councillor Armitage.
So, the result was 20 for, 20 against and 1 abstention, but with the chairman's casting vote, that makes 21 for, 21 against and 1 abstention. I believe my work here is done, so we shall call in, if we can, the members who had left the room. I'm just wondering if Councillor Ruff would be kind enough to let me have one of her mints before I leave my seat here.
Chair. In the meantime, can I ask if Councillor Barry's going to jump to my defence after I was called laughable by the opposition, or am I being a bit of a snowflake about that?
Here we go. Item 7, Treasury Statutory Reports. This leads us into that, and it's over to Councillor Kenyon again.
Yes, one of the most exciting reports of the year, this. I read it in great detail to my sleep's detriment. Yes, this paper covers our borrowing strategy, investment strategy, methods. Strategies are to support the MTFP. And so while the paper includes the various capital requirements, etc., this is about the processes we use to manage our money to support that MTFP rather than the MTFP itself. The first key thing here is that there is no new borrowing planned for 23-24, and we have reduced total borrowing by £2.2 million over the last year to 147 million. It will rise slightly in future years in cash terms to support investments such as Charlie Park and Whiteley's and the Council Housing Capital Works programme, though in real terms the debt could be actually slightly lower in 4 years' time due to the effect of normal inflation as opposed to the current high inflation. It's also worth noting that of that £147 million borrowing, the large majority of it is from many years ago when the council housing stock was transferred to the council. As you would expect, the aim is to make the most efficient use of our funds balanced against risk. And in general, and in part due to regulation, we take a fairly cautious approach to investing. I'm sure we can all remember the Icelandic bank problems that some organisations got themselves into. And we also have funds of various kinds, such as the HRA, that fluctuate as needed to support the capital programme. So when you look at the numbers, 1 year doesn't really tell you much, it's the whole sequence of it. And so what that means is rather than having money just sitting there earning nothing, we want to maximise return on it. But sometimes that actually means effectively borrowing the money internally is better than borrowing from the market. So it's a really complex picture in there, to be honest. And our officers manage that on our behalf to optimise that, whatever the circumstances are. One last thing, just important to note the difference between prudent and imprudent borrowing. Opinions might differ on these things, but prudent borrowing will, for example, have a robust business case behind it, which will always include the full cost of that borrowing, regardless of any treasury management work that might mean less cash is actually borrowed than needed. And we have several examples of that, such as Charlie Park, I would expect. will happen. That's not quite happened yet. That's in the next year or two. And we have and will continue to avoid any imprudent borrowing. So I move the recommendations in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for the report? Councillor Dale? And now open the floor for other members to speak. Does anyone wish to make a comment? Councillor Barker?
Yeah, thanks for that, Jez. I think you've clarified it for me. Thank you.
No more? No. Councillor Shipman?
I think I might be speaking for the audit committee when I say this, but I think most of us agree on there that the council's not doing enough with its money. We are very safe from all the reports and presentations we've had at audit. We are ultra safe. And to quote Councillor Thacker, it probably make more money under his bed than it would with what we're doing with it. You can share it. But yeah, it's just very bland, isn't it? The plan that we have is bland. We could be making, you know, we're talking about budgets being squeezed and we're having to put up rents and council tax having to go up, and yet we've got this money sat there that we could be doing more with to make more money with it. And we're just simply not doing that. But I think the cabinet need to look at that and actually, again, come up with a plan to do that.
Thank you. Any other comment? Councillor Dale, would you like to wish to reply?
No, nothing really to add. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Kenyon?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Yes, I would say we probably are erring on the safe side. Again, I think if you follow the news, there's no end of councils have got into difficulty with, I don't know, energy company schemes, borrowing money and then investing it to try to get a higher return and then failing miserably. We do use that money to fund some of the borrowing for things like the investments in leisure centres and things like that. And I think that's a sensible way to get a higher return on that money. It doesn't actually show up very clearly in the figures, I think, but it's a sensible way to do it. And if it was my own money, personally, I would probably take a higher risk with it. When it's public money, it's just not the same option. You have to be more cautious, and it's one of those, it's an easy thing to say, and I do wish that we could make more out of it, but yeah, it's a brave person who pushes the boat out on that, to be honest, and you increase the risk of the council in a way that I don't think would be worth the small extra returns. Thank you.
Thank you. There is a motion before us which has been moved and seconded. Can we agree this by acclamation? Or do you want a roll call? Everyone all in favour, please show the hands. Thank you very much, that's passed. Item 8, review of the council's policy under the Gambling Act 2005. This is the review of the council's policy under the Gambling Act 2005. I would like the portfolio holder, Councillor Mark Foster, to speak on it. Over to you, Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to present the report into the review of the council's policy under the Gambling Act. The council is responsible for the regulation of gambling licences under the Gambling Act 2005. As part of those responsibilities, the council is required to review and publish a new policy every 3 years. It's standard practice to also publish a local area profile with the policy. In 2018, the council's policy and local area profile underwent an extensive review to ensure that they were consistent with national guidance, and as a result were published in 2019. In 2022, the Environmental Health Service conducted a review of the policy and the local area profile and identified some minor changes that needed to be made. Those changes included updates to the references to national guidance and updates to the local demographic information. That was population statistics and current license numbers largely. The revised policy and local area profile were approved by the licensing committee, and a public consultation was carried out over 12 weeks. The responses then of that consultation were then considered by the committee, and final versions of the policy and lab were approved with a recommendation to council that they be adopted, and officers be instructed to follow the statutory process for adoption. I'm happy to move, Chair, the recommendations on page 98. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Liggett, thank you. I'll now open the floor to members who wish to speak or make comment.
Well done that. Thank you.
The motion has been moved and seconded. Are we happy to agree this by acclamation? Let's have a quick show of hands. Everybody happy? Thank you. Item 11 is motions. Just to confirm that we have no questions that either the public or members, so go straight to item 11, which is the motions. We only have one today, which has been marked on your agenda as motion A. This motion has been moved by councillor Barker, who I think would now like to update us on this. Councillor Barker?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I'd wish to withdraw this motion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, point of order, can I have him vet?
No,
Oh.
very simple. Item 12 is the end of the meeting. So the motion has been withdrawn, so that leads straight on to urgent business, which there isn't any. So I now declare the meeting over. Thank you all for your attendance, and I hope to see some of you on Sunday. Take care.